The first step whenever I'm making cake is to make my parchment rounds for the bottom of my cake pans. I'm just showing you where I'm placing the cake pan on the store-bought parchment paper. When you buy the parchment paper from the supermarket, it always comes in a roll, and I like to do my tracing on the inside of the roll. So I just take a pencil or pen or Sharpie and I trace the outside diameter of the cake pan on the parchment paper. I do it this way and not, tracing it on the outside of the paper, because when I cut it out, I can place the side that has the pencil mark on it directly next to the bottom of the cake pan, and that'll just make sure that the parchment paper lies flat in the pan and doesn't constantly curl up, which I've done before, and it's very annoying. You have to constantly keep pressing down on the paper. I'm doing so many tracings here because I have a lot of cakes to make. You can also do this if you want to use parchment rounds every time you make a cake, but you don't want to spend the time to do this before you make each cake. You can just make them all at once, cut them out, put them in a Ziploc bag, and have them for whenever you need them. Or you can do it this way, which is just, cutting out the parchment rounds that you need for the moment. And here it's the same thing. I'm just tracing the outside diameter of the cake pan with a pencil. Like I said before, you can use a Sharpie or a pen. And then I'm just going to cut it out with a pair of scissors. And after I cut it out, I'll place it inside my cake pan just to make sure that it fits well in there. And if it doesn't, there's a trick that I use that you'll see coming up after I cut out my parchment round. I want to mention that this step is not at all necessary. I just like to use it because it gives me extra security that my cake will release from my cake pan easily once it's finished baking. You also do not have to make these yourself. You can buy pre-cut parchment rounds at places like Michael's or Wilton.com or Sur La Table. I don't know if they sell them at Williams-Sonoma, but I'm pretty sure they have to sell them on Amazon. And the reason that I'm not using pre-cut parchment rounds is because my cake pans are so small that they don't sell pre-cut parchment rounds for the diameters that I'll need. But if you're making an 8-inch cake or a 10-inch cake, you can definitely buy pre-cut parchment rounds. So here again, I'm showing you what side of the parchment paper I'm sticking inside my cake pan. And now I'm just, seeing how it fits in my cake pan. And I see that my round is a little bit too large for my cake pan. So what I'll do is I'll place it in as well as I can. I'll use my nail to just make a rough line or guide of where I need to cut off the excess parchment paper. And then I'll just take it out of the cake pan and I'll cut it with the scissors. And I'll check again to see how it fits into my cake pan. And if I don't have any problems, then it's on to the next step. And as I said before, you do not at all have to feel obligated to use parchment rounds in your cake pans. It's an additional step. You can just use non-stick cooking spray in your cake pans and you'll be all set. So I've just finished cutting out my round or cutting off the excess. And it fits really nice in my cake pan. I'm really pleased. I'm showing you right here that there's a little gap right there, but I'm not very concerned about that. It won't really make a huge difference to my baked cake. Now I'm just showing you the pan sizes that I'll be using for my cake. So the first pan is 4.5 inches, the second is 5 inches, the third is 6 inches, and the last one is 7 inches. The next step is getting my ingredients ready. So for all of my ingredients that were refrigerated, my eggs, my butter, my milk, I want to bring them up to room temperature. So I'm just putting my eggs in a bowl, and I'll fill this bowl with warm room temperature water. And by warm, I mean a little bit warmer than body temperature. And I'll test it with my hand just to make sure it's in a good place. And the eggs will sit in this water while I am readying all the other ingredients, slowly coming up to room temperature. I don't have to think about it. They're sitting in the bowl. It's easy peasy. Now it's on to the butter. You can soften your butter by leaving it out overnight. I don't always remember to do this, so my best option is to put it in the microwave. If you have a microwave like mine where you can change the power settings, I put mine on power level 2, and I do it for 1 minute. And after that 1 minute, I check the butter to see how it feels. And then I flip them over, and I'll do it for another minute at power level 2. And normally that is all that I need to soften my butter for my cakes. If you don't have that power level setting on your microwave, you can just run the butter for 10-second intervals in the microwave until it reaches the consistency that you want. I do the exact same for the milk. Here I'm showing you that I've placed my softened butter on parchment paper or wax paper, and that just makes it easier to remove because it's so soft right now that if I try to grab a hold of it, I can't really get a good hold on it. I'll squish it, it'll be squeezed in the middle, so I can just pop it on the paper and drag it around or move it anywhere that I need on the table, and I don't have to worry about dropping the butter or damaging it because it's so soft. As I said before, I do the exact same heating method with the milk. So I've popped it in the microwave at power level 2 for 1 minute. After it's finished the 1 minute cycle, I'll check the temperature with my clean fingers. And if it feels still a little cool, I'll run it again at power level 2 for 1 minute. And because I've done this multiple times, I know that's really all I need for that amount of milk. So after I've gotten my eggs, my butter, and my milk warm enough, I'll move on to zesting my citrus. If you've watched any of my previous videos on lemon meringue pie, key lime pie, or key lime ice cream, you'll know that I do these steps all the time whenever I need citrus zest. So for my recipes, I'll be using lemons and limes. I like to zest my citrus on top of wax paper or parchment paper just because it's easy to remove it when I need to put my ingredients in the mixing bowl. And that's just because parchment paper and wax paper are coated so things don't stick to them. So here I'm using a microplane to zest my citrus. It's my favorite zesting tool just because I'm not very good at using actual zesters, which are a tool which kind of look like those metal can openers with the hook at the end, but instead of a hook, it's just a solid sort of U-shaped end, and there are 2 hole or circle depressions on the inside, and you do the same that you would with the microplane. You rub the fruit against it or rub it against the fruit and the zest of the citrus comes off, but I'm not very good at using it. That's why I use a microplane. So here I'm just gonna fold up my wax paper and move my zest off to the side until I need it again. So here I'm going to show you 2 ways to separate eggs because this cake will be a white cake, so I won't need the whole egg. The first is going to require 3 containers. 1 container for your yolks, 1 container for your whites, and then a transfer container. So I've poorly cracked this egg, and now I'm just going to separate the white of the egg from the yolks. And once I've finished separating the white and the yolk, I'll leave the white in this bowl. I'll put the yolk in my tall container, and then I'll transfer these whites into my Pyrex measuring cup. And this method is just for safety purposes. Say for instance you need 8 egg whites and you've already separated 7, and you crack open your last egg and there's blood in it, or for reasons that are unknown, the yolk is broken and it ruins that egg. It doesn't ruin all of your egg whites, and you can just toss out that bad egg, from your transfer container, break another egg, separate it properly, and then pop it into your measuring cup. Or if you feel like you are a master at separating eggs, you can just crack your egg and separate it directly into your white container. Next is dry ingredients. So here I have 2 1/4 cups of cake flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and 3/8 of a teaspoon of salt. This is just a strainer that I got from Star Market. It was like a set of 3, cost like $5. I've had it for over 10 years and it's still going strong. You just put all of your ingredients in a sifter, or your dry ingredients in a sifter, and you sift them to get rid of any lumps in the flour or the baking powder or the salt, and to evenly disperse the dry ingredients together. I prefer to use cake flour for my cakes over all-purpose flour, just because cake flour has a little less protein or gluten in it, which means that when I'm mixing the cake, if I overmix it, it won't get too tough and it just makes a softer product. So here is a trick that I'm using because I didn't have any table salt. I just had this huge container of coarse kosher salt. So when I have situations like this, I like to pour more than I need into a measuring cup and then measure out what I need with the spoon, so that I don't make a mess on the counter, spilling things, or have a really difficult time trying to get into the spout of the container. Here I'm preparing my cake pans for the oven. So I've just sprayed some non-stick cooking spray on the bottom of my cake pan, and then I've placed my parchment round on the bottom. The non-stick cooking spray acts as a glue to ensure that the parchment paper stays flat. Then I'm going to spray the entire cake pan on the inside with non-stick cooking spray. Then I'm just going to use a paper towel to move all that non-stick cooking spray around, making sure that everything is coated and there's no pooling of the spray on any part of the cake pan. After this, I'm going to get anywhere from 2 tablespoons to 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, so 1/8 of a cup to 1/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. I'm just going to throw it in the bottom of the cake pan. Then I'm just going to shake the cake pan around to make sure that the entire bottom of the cake pan is covered with the all-purpose flour. Then I'll lift up the cake pan to about horizontal position. I'll get my second cake pan, put it directly under the one in my hand. Then I'll start to just rotate and pat the pan to make sure that everything is getting coated with flour on the sides of the cake pan. Having the second cake pan underneath just makes sure that I catch any flours that fall out, and it's just a time-saving effort. So once I'm satisfied with the coating on the inside of the pan, I'll firmly tap the pan in my hands to the pan on the bottom a couple of times just to get out any excess flour. And here I think I did a pretty good job. I have a few spots where the non-stick cooking spray pooled, but it's not going to make a huge difference to my final product, so I'm okay with that. I'll do these steps again with the second cake pan. Shaking it, making sure the bottom is covered, and then holding it horizontally, turning and tapping to make sure that all the sides of the cake pan are being coated in the all-purpose flour. And since I don't have another cake pan to coat, I'll just tap the pan on the tabletop to get out any excess flours. And here you'll see that I have a paper towel and a piece of wax paper. So I'll take the wax paper, fold it up and move it off. It's a super simple and easy way to clean up my area. I'll either put it in the trash or the compost bin, and then I'll use the paper towel underneath to just wipe up any dust or residual flowers that are on the table. Try to get the area as clean as possible. After this, I'll set up my sheet pan for the oven. So I'm taking a sheet pan and I'm going to put a piece of foil on top, and then I'm going to place my prepared cake pans in the sheet pan. And I do this for 3 reasons. First, if there's any kind of spillage while the cakes are cooking in the oven, they'll fall right onto the sheet pan. Second, it's easier for me to travel with the cakes if they're on a sheet pan. So into the oven, out of the oven, to the oven. And third, it'll be easier for me to rotate the cake pans in the oven to ensure even cooking. All I have to do is turn the sheet pan. I don't have to move the cake pans and risk burning myself or getting confused as to which cake pan I rotated and when I rotated it. And that's particularly if you have 2 cake pans that look exactly the same. So now I'm moving on to making my batter. I have my zest in the bowl. Again, that's just the zest of 2 medium to large lemons. I'm going to add in my sugar, which is 1 1/8 cups of sugar. And then I'm going to run the mixer on medium speed for about 1 minute. And that'll just make sure that the oils from the zest will really come out and really flavor the cake. Since I'm doing an experiment here with this recipe, I didn't add any other kind of citrus flavoring, but normally if I was making this cake for a family or for myself and not doing it as an experiment, I would totally use a citrus oil in addition to the citrus zest in the recipe. I'm not sure what the name of the citrus oil I last used was for my lemon cake, but I do know that they sell it at Sur La Table and Williams-Sonoma. I'll try to include it in the description. So once the zest and the sugar have been mixing for 1 minute on medium speed, I stop the mixer, I add in the butter, and this is 1 1/4 sticks of butter. I'm going to run the butter on the lowest speed possible for a couple of seconds just to break it up. Then I'm going to stop the mixer and I'm going to add in 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons of a liquid oil. I like to do this step when I have butter cakes because I find that without it, the cakes are a little bit dry, and that liquid oil, whether it's canola oil or corn oil or my personal preference, safflower oil, it adds that necessary amount of moisture to make sure that the cakes are moist and stay moist throughout the baking process. So once I've added in the safflower oil, I turn the mixer up to about speed 5 or 6 on the KitchenAid, medium speed on a hand mixer, and I just let it run for 3 to 4 minutes to cream the butter. And creaming just means that you're mixing the butter and the sugar together so quickly that the friction of it creates little air pockets in the butter, and once the cake goes into the oven, as the butter melts, those air pockets will release into the batter and help your cake rise. Here I'm just scraping down my bowl and the mixer, just making sure that everything is combined, that there are no clumps of zest in there, that there's no butter in there that hasn't been mixed in, or clumps of sugar. This is really tedious, but this is a super important step when you're making cakes. You'll do this step more often than any other step in making cakes from scratch. So even though it kind of sucks and sometimes it's kind of messy, it's definitely worth it. So I finished scraping down the bowl and the whisk or paddle attachment, and now I'm just going to add in my egg whites, and that was 3 large egg whites. And once I've added them in on low speed, I'm going to turn the mixer up again to medium speed, so on the KitchenAid about speed 6, and I'm going to let that run for 2 minutes uninterrupted. It's going to make sure that the egg whites are really well incorporated into the butter mixture, but also just to make sure that I'm keeping that air that I've incorporated into my batter. And while the mixer is running here, you can take the time to reorder your area to make sure that your milk and your dry ingredients are close at hand. I like to add in my dry ingredients with a measuring cup, just because it's something that I have on hand in the moment and it's easy to use, and I don't have to worry about trying to tilt my entire bowl of dry ingredients into my mixing bowl and be concerned or worried that I might have some kind of spillage and have to stop and restart this recipe. So again, I've just scraped down the bowl, I've cleaned off the paddle, and now I'm going to add in my first addition of flour. So it'll be 3 additions of the dry ingredients and 2 additions of the milk. So dry ingredient, mix, scrape, milk, dry ingredients, mix, scrape, milk, dry ingredients. I like to run the mixer on low speed for maybe 30 seconds until almost all of the butter is incorporated. Then I like to scrape down just to get rid of and to incorporate any of the flour or dry ingredients that's flown up on the side of the bowl and isn't being mixed in. And once I've scraped down the bowl and scraped down the paddle, I'll put the head of the mixer down again, and on the lowest speed possible, just run the mixer maybe for 5 to 10 seconds to incorporate the stuff, dry ingredients that weren't incorporated previously. So again, running the mixer on low speed for just a couple of seconds. And then I'm going to add in my first addition of milk. That's 3/4 cup of milk in total. So here I don't normally have to stop the mixer and scrape it when I'm adding in my liquid ingredients. But you'll see in a couple of seconds that my milk was a little cool, and so it wasn't incorporating properly into my cake batter, so it's pushing the batter up against the sides of the bowl. So just like the dry ingredients, I'm going to stop the mixer, scrape down the bowl, scrape down the paddle, turn on the mixer on low speed just to make sure that everything is incorporated but not over mixing the batter, and then I'll just move on to the next step. As I was saying, like I would with the flour, I'm just going to run the mixer for a short amount of time on the lowest speed possible just to make sure that everything is incorporated, but that I'm not over mixing my batter. And then I'll repeat these steps again. So dry ingredients, mix until almost combined, stop the mixer, scrape the sides of the bowl and the paddle just to make sure that none of the flour is left out of the batter. Run the mixer for a few seconds on low speed. Add in the last addition of milk. Run the mixer. Stop. Look at the batter. Make sure everything looks cool. Add in the last addition of the dry ingredients. Run the mixer until everything is almost combined. Stop, scrape, run it again on low speed, and then that's it. So this is the final batter, and this is how I portion out my batter. I like to use a scale. You don't have to use a scale. This is another optional step, but I like to make sure that my batter is as even as possible so that my cakes are baking at the same time. So an acceptable difference in weight for me is 1 ounce or less. I generally pick an arbitrary number to start with. So for this cake, I decided that I wanted to have at least 5 ounces in each cake pan. So I'll do 5 ounces in both cake pans, and then I'll evenly distribute the remainder of the batter into both cake pans. As I've said before, you do not have to do this. This is an optional step. I'm just super anal, and I want to ensure that my cakes are as equal as possible, as similar as possible, just so that I don't have to spend any extra time looking inside the oven when the cakes are baking, trying to figure out, is this one done? Is that one done? Having one cake that's done way before the other. This is another optional step. I'm just using my offset spatula to smooth the top of the cake so that when the cakes bake, they won't be lumpy on top. I'll take this opportunity to talk to you about these cakes. These cakes were also part of the experiment. I was trying entirely new recipes for this experiment. That was part of the gig. But they didn't work out because they were super dry and thick and unpleasant. So the recipe that I've been telling you about is a recipe that I have for white cake. That's a tried and true recipe that I have added citrus zest to. I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't work out. Part of the super controlling, like anal part of me was like, oh, it's ruined. But there's no reason why you guys shouldn't have a white cake recipe that will work for you. So these are just my cakes from the oven. They're nice and smooth on top. I was really pleased with how they came out. I lost my footage for taking the cakes out of the pan. My camera stopped recording. I'm sorry about that. I will be doing more cakes in the future, so you will definitely see that step. Here, I've removed the cakes from the pan. They're cooled, and now I'm just wrapping them so that I can store them in the fridge overnight. So first, it's just one piece of plastic wrap that I fold around the cake, making sure that everything is nice and tight and sealed and there are no air pockets. And that the ends are folded nice and tight on the bottom. And then I'll rotate the cake so the part of the cake that was the bottom for the first wrapping will be the top for the second wrapping. And again, it's the same thing, just making sure that everything is nice and smooth and tight and that there are no air pockets. And that's it, 2 layers of plastic wrap, and it can go right into fridge on a sheet pan, and you're good to go.